Hey, this is Madeline Sklar.
And Suze Cooper, and you're listening to All Things Audio. We're actually going to pick up and start where we kind of left off last week. So last week, me and Madeline were discussing social audio versus podcasting and kind of the pros and cons of each of them, and whether or not people who are creating audio content at the moment are considering creating social audio instead of creating a podcast. And perhaps that might have had an impact on a report that we'd seen that said that podcast creation was really taking a bit of a nosedive. So I put out a poll, Madeline, on Twitter. I mean, it is very much a finger in the air type poll. There weren't loads of votes on it. But I was asking, what do you think? Should you be creating social audio or a podcast or both? Now, it's probably quite unsurprising, but it was a resounding both. I mean, you're not surprised by that, Madeline, are you?
No, not at all, because that's my answer. Do both. And what's great about social audio is that if you can record yourself, you can turn it into a podcast. And I'm actually really seriously thinking about restarting my Twitter Smarter podcast, which has actually been on hiatus for 3 years. I can't believe it's been sitting for 3 years. So much of the content is still relevant, but here I've been doing Twitter Smarter in Spaces for 2 years. I've got so much amazing content, so I want to take that and repurpose it. So why not put that into the podcast?
Yeah, you should definitely get as much value out of any audio that you're recording as possible. So, if you're really putting effort and time into putting together the content for social audio, then consider how that might be recorded, how you can capture that, and how you might be able to repurpose it and use it later. It doesn't even have to be that week, that month. I mean, a lot of the stuff that people are talking about is generally quite evergreen. You can hold on to it for a bit and then release it again. Obviously, the way that we do it, we're kind of trying to react to what's going on in the world of social audio. So our stuff does generally, spin into the weekly show. But there's so many different ways of doing it. I love the idea of sidecarring it, which is what we talked about last week, where, you've got a podcast and you then invite people to come to the social audio session of the podcast to take part and have that kind of deeper engagement with your listeners. So, really interesting. Not a surprise, but still interesting to do. And interesting to see that there was a high number of people seeing the value in either turning social audio into a podcast or using social audio and podcasting side by side.
Absolutely. I'm surprised we don't have any Twitter Spaces news this week. Is this a first?
There is none. And I believe it might well be a first, yeah. So, Spaces, there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement at the moment with Spaces.
But it still works. It still works. And we're very happy.
I was about to say, I'm happy that it's on an even keel and more stable than perhaps we thought it might have been at this point. But nothing new coming through. So if you know of something new that's coming through about Spaces, then do please raise your hand and we'll come and chat to you about it in a bit. But from what we can tell at the moment, Spaces is just trundling along. So, which we're happy about.
Yes, I think in this case, no news is good news.
Exactly. But meanwhile, Clubhouse is racing onto the net. We spoke last week a little bit about the fact that you would be able to listen to a room from Clubhouse in your browser. It would appear that from today, there is now this one-tap web option where you can basically send a link to a room that you're in from Clubhouse and invite people to join, and they'll be able to do that via their browser, but they'll also be able to speak in the room via the web, which is massive, really. I mean, this is really Clubhouse shifting a gear. They were always app-based. It was always mobile-based. It was, what's Android got? What's iOS got? When is web coming? Is web ever going to be a thing? Well, I think we have our answer, don't you, Madeline?
Yes, I am so excited to hear this news. We've been waiting patiently for Twitter Spaces to give us the ability to broadcast from the web. Maybe with Clubhouse doing this, that'll kind of nudge Twitter to move a little bit more quickly.
I do wonder what the next thing for Twitter will be with Spaces when they do come back round to adding more features and functionality to it again. I wonder if this is like top of the list or near the top of the list. I think it's got to be once you look at the kind of main social media app players. You look at LinkedIn, you could always do it via the web on LinkedIn. And now you've got Clubhouse moving very much onto the browser. I think Twitter have to take that step, really. It's just, I guess, as and when the foundations of Twitter need to calm down a bit after the last few months of movement. And then I'm sure we will start to see more things. But I think it has to move onto the web.
I really think so. I think we know that lots of us have been saying to Twitter, please allow us to have the mic on desktop. There was a Q&A session with the Spaces team before Elon Musk took over, and they were very serious about this. I think it was pretty high on the list, but we know priorities have totally shifted over there. So we don't know what the list is, at one point we didn't know if Spaces would still be around. But we know that Elon does like Spaces, so I feel like, okay, sigh of relief. We don't have to worry about this going away. But what's the priority of their to-do list? And are they listening to, prior to Elon, they were really listening to us, Suze. I mean, they were always saying, tell us your thoughts. We want to hear from you. They were doing regular spaces, community spaces, so that we could all share feedback. So, I just don't know what's going on over there now. And actually, who is working on Spaces these days?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a team that must be keeping it upright. But yeah, it's so different, isn't it? We felt like we had an insight into the roadmap before, even if we didn't really. Like, we felt like there was that real two-way open build going on. And that was part of the interest in being part of it. You really felt like you were part of building something with them. And yeah, now it's very much behind closed doors. As I say, it's certainly stable, but where does it go from here? And, I'm kind of on the edge of my seat waiting for someone to say something about the next move that they're going to make. I think that the other massive thing about this with Clubhouse is that if you send someone a link to join a room, that person doesn't have to have downloaded the Clubhouse app, and they also don't need to have an account. So this really does broaden out how many people might jump into Clubhouse and actually, join in with social audio, because you don't even have to have the app on your phone. It's it doesn't have to be anywhere. You're literally invited via the link, and you're straight in there. So yeah, it's super interesting to think about what their direction is now.
Yeah, this is a huge boost for Clubhouse because they're doing something that no one else is offering. And it's appealing to us as podcasters because we've been saying for so long, Twitter, give us the ability to do this for our spaces. We're still waiting. It makes me think, should I take another look at Clubhouse? Should I maybe start using Clubhouse again? I haven't used it in a really long time because I love spaces. I want to stay on Twitter, but having that ability to use your computer on a desktop and have all your good podcasting gear is so incredibly appealing. And then like what you're saying, being able to send a link to anyone and they can immediately join. They don't have to open the app. They don't have to even have the app for Clubhouse. So this could be really great for Clubhouse to get more people using it. And it could just be great for social audio in general, more people utilizing it because, this is taking it to a whole new level where it's not just having the app.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if you've got a large audience elsewhere that isn't necessarily on Clubhouse or even aware of what Clubhouse is, but you want to invite them into the content that you're creating over there, it gives you the ability to do that. So, if you've got a big following on one of the other social media platforms, I don't know, Instagram, something like that, you can post this link and people will be able to join in. So it's kind of almost getting people to follow your content regardless of kind of where it is. It's opening the doors for that to happen. And meanwhile, hopefully people will then, once they're in Clubhouse, think, oh, what's this? Where am I? Look around and continue using the app. So yeah, really interesting to see that swift change. I mean, we discussed it a little bit over the last few weeks. Michael's been telling us for weeks that, Clubhouse is changing the foundations of the way it's been built. It was having new web-based, new code. And so it's kind of not surprising in a way that it is such a big change. But in terms of its culture and where it came from and the fact that it was always just in our pocket, I think this is massive.
I totally agree. And a big thank you to Michael for tweeting this out and grabbing, that audio clip of Paul Davison from Clubhouse talking about this new feature.
Yeah, great clipping there, Michael. It's not easy to do. You've obviously been practicing because, making sure you get that moment is tricky. But yeah, so if you haven't heard Paul Davison speaking about it, then definitely jump onto the tweet that's in the Nest and in the show notes, and you'll be able to hear him announcing the One Tap Web.
And there's another piece of Clubhouse news. I'm really, find this interesting that nothing on Spaces to report in the past week, but a couple of new things coming out of Clubhouse.
I mean, they're not daft, are they? I'm fairly sure that they know that things are powered down a bit at Twitter. So now's their opportunity. Whether they're going to make huge changes, it's a good time to do it when people are a little bit perhaps uneasy or unsure of Twitter. That's when the other apps need to kind of step into that place, I guess. And so it makes sense, really, that they're really upping their game and changing stuff around. But yeah, this next tweet is fantastic as well from Michael. He's done a common terms and slang that are used on the Clubhouse app. Now, I definitely need this. You heard me a couple of weeks ago asking for the 101 guide to a room, a house, a lounge, etc. I have to say, Madeline, if you haven't been over to Clubhouse for a while, you'd be, forgiven completely for opening it up and going, oh my goodness, what's going on here? There's a lot going on. It's opening the app myself, even understanding the different parts of it. If you're not over there all the time, it kind of looks a little chaotic on my screen at the moment. There's, all the different people that I know and that I follow. I can see where they are. They've all got different icons, whether they're listening, whether they're on the app, whether they're not, etc. Then there's the hallway, then there's the houses. There's a lot going on over there. So Michael's really broken it down in this amazing Twitter thread, which we've posted in the Nest, and explains exactly what all of these different terms and what all of these different things are. It's just so useful. I've bookmarked it already. If only I had Twitter Blue so that I could put it in my social audio folder, which is what I would like. But yeah, I'm definitely bookmarking this for future, and I think everybody else should too.
Yeah, I just put every tweet in this thread in the Nest because I just want to make sure all of our live listeners that are here, and so easy when there's a thread to just tap on that first tweet and not look at the rest of the thread. And I really hadn't looked at every single tweet in the thread. And I saw the first few, but I'm going through this, reading it, going, wow, there is so much here. Some of it I knew about, but green bean, I've never heard that terminology before. Not like I've been on Clubhouse too much recently. So I'm learning some new things here. Party hat. This is pretty cool. So thank you to Michael. This one comes from his Sterling Clear Audio Twitter account. Next up, we just have a few things to talk about with digital audio and podcasting. Suze, you've been uncovering some really interesting articles this week.
Yeah, I guess because I knew that we didn't have a great deal to talk about around Spaces, I kind of had a bit of a dig around to see what else was going on in the world of audio. I found this piece from Digital Information World, which I found quite interesting. They were looking at a new report that's been released by Integral Ad Science that looks at the fact that digital audio is somewhere that marketers are turning to advertise, and is basically being favoured over social media at the moment, which I thought was really interesting. And it kind of got me thinking as to why. So, digital audio marketing, you're talking podcast marketing, you're talking Spotify and streaming platforms, those ads that you might hear if you're on a free tier of those kind of streaming partners. And it's I guess no surprise, really, if you think about how radio advertising has been used over the years. And, stats there show that people really do react to radio ads and will go out and make purchases off the back of hearing an advert. So I guess that's kind of no surprise. But the idea that people have marketers themselves are switching away slightly from social media advertising, from, your Facebook ads and Instagram and that kind of thing, but putting their money behind digital audio is really quite interesting. So I guess it is that high conversion that they're after. I know that Spotify, they've got a self-serve platform for their advertising, which has got some really good targeting on it. And I guess people are seeing, great conversion rates and really capturing people where they are. We know people are listening to podcasts and to digital audio quite a lot. It's one of those things that we do while we're driving, while we're walking, all of those different things. So you're kind of able to get your message across to people wherever they are. They don't just have to be scrolling and within the app where you've placed your ad. So yeah, just interesting to see that this particularly kind of calls out the fact that marketers are perhaps not quite so confident, about advertising on social at the moment, but more than happy to take a look at audio and use digital audio instead.
Right. I did find this really interesting. The stats are very interesting for sure. And yeah, talking about what are media priorities in 2023, I think because digital audio, social audio, podcasting, all these different forms of audio are growing, getting more popular, I think plenty of advertisers are looking for alternatives. Like you were saying, like they're looking for things that work. Social media is not always the answer. It can definitely be good, but I think it's smart to try other things. And interesting to see that, 54% for digital audio, and that's like top priority over social media. That was really surprising, but very interesting for sure.
I mean, I guess really social media is taking a sort of shift in itself, isn't it? I mean, you look at the demographics of the different platforms, that's very different to where it was 10 years ago. That's the point. You've got a much older audience on Facebook. You've got TikTok coming up very fast on the inside. And that's a whole different way of marketing and having to put together an ad. I guess it's easier to put together an audio ad than perhaps it is a video ad, probably cheaper as well. So to capture that younger audience, we know Gen Z are listening on Spotify. Is it cheaper and easier to create your audio advert and put it onto Spotify than it is to create a video ad and put it over on TikTok, where you might capture the similar audience? So I guess that's at play there as well. But yeah, super interesting to see that it's been picked up by this report.
Yeah, definitely. And then you found a really interesting article that relates to us talking about podcasts last week.
Yeah, so I guess this kind of ties in with what we were talking about at the beginning of this show when I was saying about putting the poll out there and us sort of talking about had social audio taken some of that audio creation space from podcasting. The reason we were talking about that was because it was off the back of this Listen Notes report that showed an 80% drop in new podcast shows in 2022, which sounds like a very huge drop. Now, obviously, lots of these different online articles will use a shocking stat like that as a headline grabber. And, we discussed it. We talked about the reasons why that might have been. We spoke about the pandemic and how people had probably started up podcasts while they were stuck in lockdown and at home with nothing better to do, and then perhaps haven't continued them. But I was really taken by this this take from James Cridland, who brings out Pod News, and which is a kind of daily podcast-centered newsletter. And he really looks into what these figures are really showing. And he kind of comes up with a very similar answer in that, yes, there were a lot of people that that created podcasts during the pandemic and didn't continue them. But equally, he suggests that these figures themselves from Listen Notes don't take into account some Spotify figures, which make up quite a lot of the numbers. So like the Spotify exclusive catalogue isn't included here. And that's a high number of podcasts. And also the fact that people that did create those podcasts during the pandemic used potentially Anchor, which is a free hosting service. So it would have been free to set up their podcast. And Anchor doesn't actually submit to Apple Podcasts anymore, which is one of the main places that Listen Notes would have got some of these from. So I guess what it does is just highlights these different areas where there are really large numbers of podcasts sat that weren't taken into account in this research. So yeah, there was a dip, but maybe not quite as headline grabbing as it seems in the first place. I would definitely urge anyone that's into podcasting and that was kind of shocked by the stat to take a look at James's research and his article here. In fact, he even points out that in terms of episode numbers, 2022 was pretty much on the same trajectory as it had been previously. So definitely a dip with hosts such as Anchor. They definitely had a drop of fewer podcasts being made. But on paid platforms, there was a drop, but nowhere near as much. So he says Acast was a drop off of about 10%, Captivate 20%. So I mean, all of these figures are kind of manipulated, massaged in different ways. But I definitely trust James Cridland's point of view, and this is really well put together and explains quite a lot.
It really does. And what's also interesting with these numbers is that while there are less podcasts than a few years ago, like new podcasts, there's more new episodes that have come out. And I think that says a lot too.
Yeah, and I think that may well be symptomatic of lots of people going into playing with the length of their podcasts. So anyone who's got a large back catalogue of podcasts that may well be like an hour long, there's this kind of trend at the moment where you'll go back into that back catalogue and perhaps put out a 15-minute version of that longer podcast from 2 years ago that your newer listeners might not have heard. So you'll kind of package up a short form version of it and obviously then signpost them back to the full episode in your back catalogue. And that then gives you kind of another bite of the cherry, but also means that you might be putting out your weekly podcast on a Monday, but this extra short form version might go out on Friday to try and catch the weekend audience. So that's then doubling the amount of episodes, if you see what I mean. I think potentially that trend could well have helped support that number of episodes continuing, even though shows are dropping. But yeah, really interesting to look at.
Yeah, and also if somebody has an existing podcast and then they're also doing spaces, they want to repurpose that content, that can be an extra episode per week too, very easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
For some.
And when you've got third-party creators like Zealous kind of offering RSS feeds and things like that off the back of social audio, it does make it very easy to just spin up your space or your Clubhouse room and create that as a podcast and have it out there as well. So yeah, lots of different ways that people can be getting their audio content out there. And, I'm encouraged anyway that despite that headline grabbing stat, it's not all as bad as we might have first thought.
Exactly. And now it's time for our question of the week. This is becoming our new thing that you and I have been playing around with. Just like before, we shared the poll in the nest of the question we asked from last week. And for this week, we want to ask everybody, is fancy equipment necessary to host a social audio event? Yes or no? So we've got that in the nest. And we're going to keep this poll up for a week. So for anyone listening to the replay of this in Spaces, or for those listening to the podcast version, you can definitely participate in this poll as well.
Yes. So I'm interested in this question. I am, because obviously, we started this discussion hearing about your podcast studio, Madeline, that you've created at home. And I'm broadcasting from my own little podcast corner. It's not really a studio, it is a corner. But, I've got the Rodecaster and I've got the fancy mic and all of that kind of thing. But is it really necessary? I don't think it is.
No, I don't think it is, at least not with the social audio like Spaces and Clubhouse. These environments, it is so easy to just, use your phone, use what you got. There are ways of putting your fancy equipment as a podcaster into your phone, make it work through your phone. And, we know plenty of people, you're doing that. George does that. A lot of people we know that come here are able to use their fancy podcast microphone through their phone, their smartphone. But is it necessary? No, of course not. You can just use what you got. But if you're techie and you know how to do it or want to learn how to do it, there's nothing wrong with that. But, but we're using that keyword necessary. I do not think it's necessary at all.
I bought the Rodecaster after social audio became a thing. I'd always wanted one. This gave me a reason to save up and actually get one. And, I love it. But I don't use it for anything else. And I create audio all the time. And I don't really go to the Rodecaster and set it all up to create audio. I record directly into a Zoom H5 recorder, which I think you've got a similar one, Madeline, because it's kind of quicker and easier to just shove the microphone into that. But I think as well that the reason that I wanted the equipment and I wanted to be able to use my microphone was really so I could record it. And of course, when Spaces first showed up, there was no recording, there was no capturing anything that you were doing live on social audio. And that really bugged me. Like, I didn't want to be creating content that couldn't be used elsewhere, that I couldn't turn into a blog if I wanted to or access again. So I wanted a way of recording it. However, I think if I wasn't recording it, I would absolutely be on my AirPods. And, when I'm over on Clubhouse on a Friday night, I am not on my fancy podcast mic in my corner studio. I am just on my AirPods, and it's about just communicating with other people and making those connections beyond, how it sounds and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think you said it there, really. Start with what you've got where you are and go from there. Hello, Michael.
Hello, friends. Good to see you again.
Hey, Michael.
I feel like there's so much to talk about Clubhouse. I mean, I even have thoughts on, using fancy audio equipment and so on, since that's kind of what I do. So, we can go wherever you want to take this, but there's certainly lots of exciting things going on right now with Clubhouse, and let's talk about it. Sure.
So, am I right that you can only access Clubhouse on the web if someone sends you a link from the app? You can't kind of find Clubhouse on the web and join something.
That is correct. I mean, now they've had web listening for quite a while now, since they actually launched replays back in November of 2021. People have been able to listen to rooms on the web even while they are live, but they've never been able to actually speak on the web or join a room on the web. That's something you have to do in the app to be able to participate and not just listen. So it sounds like this is actually sort of a replacement or enhancement of listening on the web to be able to actually participate on the web. And how that's going to be implemented is yet to be seen. It hasn't launched as of this conversation today, but we are all waiting with bated breath on Clubhouse to find out what it's going to be like exactly when that happens. So it should be really interesting.
Do you think this will bring more people to Clubhouse just because of the fact that you'd be able to do it through the web, whether you're a listener or speaking?
Yeah, I think so, and I hope so. I kind of feel like this might be a great way to provide a little bit of a sampler or a trial to people who have not used Clubhouse before, to see what it's like to, participate in a room, speak in a room, and meet new people and so on. And maybe by, jumping into a room, having never experienced Clubhouse before, that will be interesting and exciting enough to them that they'll be like, okay, I want to sign up for this platform. And they're going to go to the App Store and they're going to download it and get an account and keep it going. So I think this is only a positive in the way of bringing new people onto the platform. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've already seen an article, I think it was 9 to 5 Mac, have already said, Clubhouse have moved onto the web, but it's all too late. I mean, isn't that always the way? Like, there's this continual, oh no.
I've been thinking about that. Like, everybody, just like, and there's people on Clubhouse that even think that things that Clubhouse have been doing are too late. Subscription houses, they're like, well, if they'd done this a year ago. And I mean, it's just, I feel like in tech and just in humanity in general, people tend to be really impatient. And it's always, well, you could have done this earlier. You could have done this earlier. But people are going to be people, and things take time. And sometimes you got to work on sequencing of things. And so, better late than never is what I say.
Yeah, and what happened to living in the moment, right? This is where we are now. This is the thing that we're working on now that's available to us, rather than thinking it all 2 years ago or whatever. Yeah, interesting.
And it'll be interesting to see if Elon gets real competitive with this and hurries up and does this for Spaces.
Yeah, and I guess this is where I was saying, like, at what point does it put fire in Twitter's belly to actually make a move and do something? That's where I'm sat with my popcorn at the moment, waiting to see what is it that's going to tip them over the edge. Because, we feel like Elon's behind Spaces and it's here and it's stable, etc., etc. But what is going to be the next move or the next first move? However you want to put that. But yeah, I'm interested to see what it is that they'll do and whether it'll be pushing this out onto the web because that's what's happening elsewhere. So yeah, I'm watching.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many people I've spoken to that are upset that you can't run Spaces on a tablet. You can't run it on the web. It is, stuck to your small phone screen. And, Clubhouse has had its third-party unofficial app Club Deck for a long time. So people have been able to do Clubhouse on the desktop. And Clubhouse is now rolling out their native options. And so, it really does light a fire underneath Twitter and go, well, your competitors are doing things you're not doing. If you want to stay relevant and keep growing this, you may need to accelerate your development of this stuff.
Yeah, good point. Next up is Paul. Paul's here with us.
I don't know. Twitter, it's a funny one these days, isn't it? I think where my head is at, think about how people are using Twitter and then think about how Elon would make a decision, right? He's got a lot going on. He owes people a lot of money, a lot more is coming out. I think Spaces will stay as they are for quite a long time unless it breaks, in which case they'll fix it. I think two things would change his mind on that. Number one, if lots of people started to use it who are well followed, doing stuff regularly and that sort of thing. I think that would cause him to prick up his ears and that sort of stuff. The other thing is if the crypto left, he'd cut it in a heartbeat, I'm pretty sure. My biggest thing about the last point was more about how people use Twitter, or rather what device they use Twitter on, which will tell you a lot about how quickly things will come, and it's been proven in the past. More people use Twitter on their mobile device than desktop. Hardcore users, aka journalists and all the other sort of people, use it on the desktop, and that's why they always ask for these features. But actually the average person, over 60% of people, use Twitter mobile first. That's why they always, roll out innovation for that sort of subset. So I think you're unlikely to see it on desktop anytime soon. I hope so. I think it's more interesting. But the majority of people, and also from a notification perspective, more people get notified via their mobile. So again, just keeping that in mind would be my 10 cents for this one.
Great points. I love that.
Really great. And I guess, it does all really tie in with what we were talking about with regards to using audio equipment. It's far easier to do that if it's available on desktop. I guess that's why I liked the fact that I could go live on LinkedIn audio events, and I knew that I could do that straight away via the Rodecaster with the decent sounding mic, etc. It's not impossible to get a better sound on the mobile. We've just said, you've got plug-in mics, all of those kind of things. But once it's available on the web, it does open you up to being able to use the other audio equipment that's out there if you want to. So, really interesting though, Paul. Thanks.
I think that's the other point, isn't it? They probably don't want that. They probably want Twitter Spaces to stay on Twitter Spaces, even though that's really annoying for us. That for them is a unique selling point for people to come just to Twitter, if that makes sense. So I would imagine, like they're doing with the other APIs and developers, they're lopping all of that off. And I think that I have nothing to support this, but I think they're doing it for two reasons. I think they're pulling everything back so they can grow again in the way they want to grow. That's my only 10 cents on that one. But to your point about, do you need top tier gear and that sort of thing, you and I both know from mouthwash that A, you don't, and B, I'm bad at using it.
I see Michael has his hand raised. Hey, Michael.
Yeah, and Paul's points are well taken. And somebody who has hosted on Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces and has heard a lot of people hosting, knows a lot of people who host, people who are wanting to promote their brands or their businesses or sound like a professional or whatever. There is merit to using that USB microphone that you have for your Zoom calls and so on to sound better on Twitter Spaces, but there's no way to do it really right now. There's so many other things you can do with professional audio equipment, or something even just better than what your phone, your Bluetooth headphones can provide that can really add some legitimacy to people who are hosting. And it can help them grow their brands, and it can help them maybe make money. And so I would think that that's something really compelling. And maybe it ends up being that Twitter or Elon decides that blue is where hosting on desktop is available. That you have to pay to get those extra features or something. Whatever they want to do, and that makes sense from a fiscal standpoint. But I think there is merit when you are hosting, especially, to sound your best and promote whatever you're promoting in the highest audio quality you can get.
Don't put more ideas in his head, Michael.
Yeah, but it's not a bad one, is it? And it is one that we could legitimately see happening as well. So, yeah, an interesting point there, Michael. Morgan, I can see you've taken the mic. Have you got some Clubhouse wisdom to add?
Well, a little bit, but I just wanted to fill in some of the stuff that Paul said, which I thought was absolutely spot on. One of the other details here, I think, is that we know Twitter was working on a desktop experience before the takeover. And as Paul said, this was very much for the power users. This was the journalist class. And this class, I think, has taken a slight step down in prestige on the platform in the eyes of the new owner. And there's a question mark about whether he would be interested in servicing their needs as the primary kind of user of Twitter. So that's another question about why it might take a little bit longer to see that than we'd expect. On the Clubhouse stuff, there's a few parts of this being able to, this one-tap web thing, which I think is quite interesting. And one of them is not so much the number of people who may or may not come over, but it's how it might affect conversations. So at the moment, if you want somebody from off Clubhouse to come and talk in your room, you probably have to arrange it in advance and go and create them account if they're new or explain how to use it, things like that. But I think this opens up a kind of spontaneity to it where you're in a room and you know somebody in your contacts maybe who would be really great in this conversation and could make a great point or bring some expertise. And now you'll be able to not just send them a link, but you can, in Clubhouse lingo, ping them, which will send them a text to their mobile phone and say, hey, like, have you got a couple of minutes? There's some people talking about what you do for a living. Or, hi, John, I know we haven't talked for a couple of weeks, but if you are free, and then that person can pop into the room and contribute very quickly, literally one tap from that, and they're in the room and can speak. And I think that's going to be really interesting and will add that kind of spontaneity, hopefully some really good guest speakers to the mix, which will raise the level of conversation.
Morgan, do you know if this is going to be rolled out globally, or is this likely to be a US rollout with other territories kind of following?
This is exactly the question I'm trying to work out now. So I've just heard that it has gone live during the show, but I can't see it yet where I am. And I'm obviously in London, so this is European Union. So fingers crossed this is global. And one of the details here is this, whether or not this is for rooms with replays on. So we don't even know what kind of room. Is it all rooms yet? Is it public house rooms which don't have replays? Is it standard rooms with replays? So there's a kind of European data protection, the GDPR legislation that Clubhouse has to navigate here. But I will let you know. So fingers crossed it's global, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, and I know another thing that we were discussing kind of earlier is how it would be really cool to have the lounge, say like the social audio lounge or whatever from Clubhouse that I'm part of, open on a tab on my desktop while I'm working, and then I'll be able to hear if someone drops by and says hello, which would be pretty cool on my desktop. I mean, that's something I'm certainly interested in doing.
Yeah, so that's this other part. This is house lounges on the web. And this is just for members of the house. So the link thing will bring in anybody on the internet, assumedly to any public Clubhouse room. But the house lounge thing is just for members. So it can be quite a nice thing. Let's say you've got a group of people that you get on with quite a bit and you've been getting to know them in the house, etc. to be able to just leave that open on a tab. And when people do pass through, maybe they're checking their messages, maybe somebody started a room, you'll be able to hear them and you'll be able to join in. So I think that's targeted at a slightly different thing. It's more the remote worker type thing, or somebody who's at the office and maybe it doesn't look good for them to be on a long call on their phone, but they could leave this open on the desktop and maybe have a quiet hello to some people. Or catch up in a lunch break, something like that. So it's a slightly different market, but good that you can do it on the web.
I like the idea of that, though. And to me, that makes houses make much more sense. I mean, it's a bit like kind of Discord, I guess, because you can sort of drop by and have it open and whatever. But for me, hanging around on the app to see if anyone drops by into the house, it's kind of taking up my phone and I have to sort of be there and hanging around. But if it's just on a tab, well, I can be getting on and doing other stuff. And that, to me, makes more sense of houses, really, once it's available on the web. So I'm looking forward to hanging out in the lounge. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for adding your knowledge to our discussion today. Madeline, we're nearly at the top of the hour again.
I know. There was so much to talk about, and we have such great participation here in this room. Thanks to all of our speakers for sharing your thoughts with us today. Really enjoy it. Thank you to all of our speakers who came on and shared so much great stuff. And we're available in all of your favorite podcast apps. We're out there, All Things Audio. You can also go to allthingsaudiopodcast.com as well.
You certainly can. And you can catch us here on Twitter and use the hashtag AllThingsAudio, and we'll pick that up throughout the week. So that's it for this week. But thank you so much to everyone that's been here in the space with us and those of you listening. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Bye, everybody.